America, in 2025, stands upon the trembling edge of history. The streets hum with discontent, the voices of the people grow louder, and the echo of division reverberates through every hall of power. What we are witnessing is not merely the shaking of a government or the failure of a party. It is something far deeper. It is the sound of a nation searching for its soul. A nation once bound by ideals of liberty, justice, and truth now finds itself fragmented, uncertain of who leads, and even more uncertain of what leadership truly means. Leadership in America has always been more than politics. It has been a mirror reflecting the moral heart of the nation. From the earliest days, when the Founding Fathers signed their names to the Declaration of Independence, they did not simply build a government, they built a covenant. That covenant declared that leadership would serve the people, protect freedom, and uphold integrity above ambition. But in 2025, that covenant feels broken. The people look to Washington and see confusion instead of conviction, pride instead of principle, power instead of purpose. This is America's leadership crisis, not because we lack leaders in title, but because we lack leaders in truth. We have politicians with microphones, but few with moral clarity. We have influencers who speak loudly, but rarely speak rightly. We have those who crave authority, but refuse accountability. The crisis is not that we are leaderless. It is that we are lost in a wilderness of self, interest, fear, and division, where leadership has become performance rather than purpose. But even in this darkness, hope flickers, because the true test of a nation is not how it stands in moments of comfort and stability, but how it rises in moments of chaos and doubt. America has faced storms before: wars, depressions, assassinations, and moral revolutions. Each time, the storm has revealed not only the weakness of the powerful, but also the strength of the faithful. And this moment, as heavy as it feels, is another opportunity, an invitation to rise, to lead, to become again what America was always meant to be. Not perfect, but principled. Not dominant, but devoted to the higher calling of justice and truth. Leadership begins not in the halls of government, but in the hearts of men and women who refuse to give up on what is right. It begins in homes where parents teach their children that integrity is greater than wealth. It begins in classrooms where teachers inspire courage over comfort. It begins in churches, in communities, in small acts of compassion that restore the trust the nation has lost. Because when the people rise with moral conviction, leaders will follow. Leadership is not given, it is awakened. America's leadership crisis in 2025 is not the product of a single election or administration. It is the result of years of compromise, complacency, and moral drift. Somewhere along the line, truth became negotiable, values became flexible, and character became optional. We traded wisdom for popularity, courage for convenience, and unity for outrage. And now we stand on the edge of history, wondering why the foundation shakes. But this moment does not have to end in collapse. It can become the birth of renewal, for crisis, when met with courage, becomes the cradle of transformation. What America needs now is not another political savior, but a moral awakening. We need men and women willing to lead with conviction, not calculation. Leaders who understand that power without purpose is poison. Leaders who recognize that the true measure of greatness is not how many people serve you, but how many people you serve. Leadership demands sacrifice. It demands that we stand for what is right even when the crowd boos. It demands humility to admit mistakes and wisdom to correct them. It demands faith in something greater than ourselves, faith in God, in principle, and in the eternal truth that justice, though delayed, will never die. America's founders knew this. Lincoln knew this when he stood before a divided nation and declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Dr. King knew this when he marched with courage and said, "I have a dream," not because the dream was easy, but because the dream was right. Where are those voices today? Where are the leaders who speak truth without fear? Where are the men and women who will rise above party, pride, and popularity to defend the soul of America? The answer, perhaps, is that they are among us, but afraid. Afraid of losing followers, votes, and status. But history does not remember those who played it safe. It remembers those who stood when standing was costly. We must remind ourselves that leadership is not granted by position. It is proven by action. A true leader leads even when no one applauds. A true leader serves even when no one notices. A true leader fights for unity, not division, for hope, not hysteria, for peace, not pride. America does not need louder leaders. It needs better ones. Leaders whose words heal instead of wound. Leaders who love truth more than power and people more than themselves. Yet even as we long for such leadership, we must not wait idly, because every citizen carries the responsibility of leadership in some form. Leadership in our families, our workplaces, our communities. Leadership is not a title, it is a trust. And when each of us begins to lead with integrity, the crisis begins to break. The flame rekindles, the nation begins to heal. America's 2025 leadership crisis is a wake-up call. Divine shaking meant to separate the false from the faithful. For too long, we have placed our faith in systems instead of principles, in personalities instead of purpose. We have looked to politics to save us when what we needed was repentance. Leadership begins with humility, and humility begins when we acknowledge that we have drifted. But acknowledgement is not enough. We must turn. We must choose to rebuild not just infrastructure, but integrity. The road to renewal will not be easy. It will demand honesty in our media, justice in our courts, decency in our speech, and accountability in our governance.
It will demand courage from those who would rather stay silent, and wisdom from those who would rather speak too soon.
It will demand that we reject the toxic tribalism that tells us to see each other as enemies. Because America's strength has never been uniformity. It has been unity. A unity that celebrates diversity but never abandons truth. In 2025, as the storm of politics rages, as distrust in leadership grows, and as fear whispers that our best days are behind us, we must remember every generation faces its test. This is ours, and how we respond will define not just the headlines of history, but the destiny of our children. The question is not whether America can survive, it is whether America will choose to rise. To rise requires vision. It requires leadership that looks beyond election cycles to eternal values. It requires leaders who see not just red and blue, but a nation of souls longing for hope. It requires those who will say, enough of the chaos, enough of the corruption, enough of the compromise. It requires those willing to rebuild, trust one truth at a time. We must call our leaders back to character, but we must also call ourselves back to accountability. Because in the end, a nation gets the leaders it cultivates. If we reward deceit, we will be governed by deceivers. If we reward division, we will be ruled by tyrants. But if we reward integrity, humility, and service, then leadership will rise to meet that standard. America's leadership crisis can become America's leadership awakening. It can mark the moment when we remembered that greatness is not defined by wealth or weapons, but by wisdom and moral strength. It can mark the return of courage to our national conscience, the courage to disagree without destroying, to lead without lying, to unite without losing conviction. We are living through a time when the loudest voices are often the least wise, when emotion overrides evidence, and when outrage has become a currency. But history will not remember who shouted the loudest. It will remember who stood the firmest. It will remember those who refused to bend truth to fit convenience. It will remember those who saw beyond fear and chose faith. America's next chapter will not be written by the powerful alone. It will be written by the principled. And each of us has a pen in that story. Will we write a tale of decline, or will we write a story of redemption? Will we repeat the failures of prideful nations before us, or will we rise to embody the ideals that once made the world look to us with hope? The choice is ours. The crisis is real, but so is the opportunity. For every generation, there comes a moment when history whispers, "Now it's your turn." And that whisper has come to us. The question is, will we answer? Let us remember that leadership is not about who sits in the highest seat, but who carries the heaviest burden. It is about serving those who cannot repay you, standing for those who cannot stand for themselves, and speaking truth to power when power refuses to hear truth. It is about believing that one life, one voice, one act of courage can ignite a movement. If America is to heal, then we must become a nation of leaders, leaders of faith, of principle, of vision. We must lead not because it is easy, but because it is right. We must dare to dream again, not of dominance, but of destiny. We must believe that our better angels are not gone, only waiting for us to rise and call them forth. The world is watching. History is recording. The next generation is waiting. Let it be said that in 2025, when America stood at the edge of crisis, we did not fall. We found our strength. We did not run, we rebuilt. We did not despair, we believed. And through that belief, we led once more not as divided tribes, but as one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Because in the end, leadership is not about who commands, but who inspires. It is not about power. It is about purpose. And when purpose aligns with principle, and principle aligns with faith, no crisis is too great, and no nation too lost to find its way home again. America stands at a crossroads in 2025, divided, uncertain, and in desperate need of moral, spiritual, and visionary leadership. The air feels heavy with tension. The streets whisper of exhaustion. The people are weary, not because they lack hope, but because they have been promised hope too many times and watched it fade like smoke in the wind. The faith that once united the nation feels fractured, stretched thin between political walls, social divides, and moral confusion. It is not just a crisis of government. It is a crisis of the human spirit. Every generation reaches a turning point, a moment when the decisions made in one season shape the destiny of decades to come. This is America's moment. This is the turning point. The question is no longer who will lead us. The question has become, what kind of leaders will we follow? For leadership without moral foundation is like a ship without a compass. It may move, but it will never arrive. We are a nation that once stood as a symbol of courage, conviction, and faith. A nation that told the world freedom was worth fighting for, truth was worth dying for, and unity was worth living for.
But somewhere along the journey, we lost our direction. Our leaders began to chase applause more than purpose, influence more than integrity, and comfort more than conviction. They began to speak louder but say less. We learned to elect personalities instead of principles, and in doing so, we forgot that power without wisdom is the most dangerous form of weakness.
Look around. Our political debates sound more like battles than discussions. Our communities are more suspicious than supportive.
Our media feeds on fear because fear sells faster than faith. We have become experts at pointing fingers, but amateurs at taking responsibility. This is what happens when leadership forgets its sacred duty: to guide, not to gain; to serve, not to be seen. America's crossroads is not about geography. It is about destiny.
It is about whether we will rise from the ashes of arrogance and apathy, or whether we will sink deeper into the quicksand of division. Will we choose leaders who speak to our wounds, or those who keep reopening them?
Will we demand leaders who listen to the heartbeat of the people, or settle for those who echo the noise of their own pride?
True leadership, moral, spiritual, and visionary, has always been the soul of America. When George Washington knelt in the snow at Valley Forge, it was not politics that sustained him. It was prayer. When Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, it was not popularity that guided his hand. It was conviction. When Martin Luther King Jr. marched through the streets of Selma, it was not power he sought, it was purpose. And now, in 2025, the same Spirit calls to us again. The same God who guided our founders, who strengthened our reformers, who inspired our heroes, calls us to awaken once more. Because leadership without faith is fragile, and power without principle is perilous, America does not need louder leaders. It needs leaders of light.
Leaders who will stand firm when the crowd sways. Leaders who will speak truth even when truth is unpopular. Leaders who understand that humility is not weakness. It is wisdom in disguise.
We need leaders who remember that the highest office in this nation is not the Oval Office. It is the heart of every citizen who dares to care.
We need leadership that is not fueled by ego, but by empathy. Leadership that listens before it speaks. Leadership that heals rather than divides. Leadership that walks with courage and stands with grace. Yes, America stands at a crossroads, but crossroads are not places of despair. They are places of decision. This is the moment where history pauses, waiting to see what we will choose. Will we choose to rebuild the bridge between truth and trust? Will we choose unity over pride, character over comfort, faith over fear? Or will we continue down the road of moral erosion, where leadership becomes a mirror of our worst impulses rather than a model of our highest ideals? The answer lies not in a politician's promise, but in a nation's awakening. Because leadership begins in the soul of a people before it ever reaches the seat of power. When the people rise with conviction, leaders rise with them. When the people demand integrity, integrity becomes contagious. When the people choose faith, hope begins to rebuild the walls of a broken nation. America's crossroads in 2025 is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. And like every great story, this one will be defined not by how dark the night becomes,
but by how fiercely the light refuses to die. True leadership is not about political power, but about character, conviction, and the courage to stand for truth even when the world trembles. Because power can build empires, but only character can sustain them. Conviction can be silenced by fear, but courage turns that silence into strength. The true test of a leader is not how loud they speak when the crowd applauds, but how firmly they stand when the crowd walks away. Real leadership cannot be measured by titles, offices, or vote. It is measured by integrity when no one is watching. It is measured by whether a person will do what is right, not what is easy. Too many today seek the stage but not the standard, the spotlight but not the sacrifice. They mistake control for leadership and authority for influence. But leadership without character is nothing more than manipulation dressed in charisma. The greatest leaders in history did not rise because they craved power, they rose because they answered purpose. Moses stood before Pharaoh not to prove his strength, but to fulfill his calling. David faced Goliath not because he was fearless, but because he was faithful. Jesus himself led not from a throne, but from a cross, showing the world that the greatest form of leadership is service, and the greatest display of power is sacrifice. America's crisis today is not the absence of authority. It is the absence of authenticity. We have power holders, not pathfinders. We have decision makers, not difference makers. We have those who seek to rule, but few who seek to serve. And without character, leadership becomes nothing more than a shadow visible for a moment, but gone with the next storm. Character is the foundation upon which all true leadership stands. It is what keeps a leader humble when success comes and hopeful when failure hits. It is what makes a person's word stronger than their reputation, and their actions louder than their speeches. Without character, even the most intelligent mind will lose its way. Without conviction, even the most powerful position will crumble. And without courage, even the best intentions will die in silence. Conviction is the heartbeat of leadership. It is the fire that burns within when compromise looks convenient. It is the inner voice that says, "Stand your ground," when fear whispers, "Back down." Conviction does not bend with polls or fade with popularity. It endures. It is the unshakable belief that truth is still truth even when no one else believes it. And courage is the lifeblood of every true leader. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something greater than fear is worth standing for. Courage is what drives a leader to speak when silence is safer. It is what compels them to act when waiting is easier. Courage is what builds nations, restores faith, and redeems history. America needs that kind of leadership again. Leadership that stands tall when the winds of criticism blow strong. Leadership that holds firm when the ground of public opinion shakes. Leadership that refuses to trade conviction for convenience or faith for fame. Because when the world trembles, the true leader does not hide, they anchor themselves in truth. Leadership is not inherited, it is forged. Forged in the fires of adversity, in the long nights of doubt, in the moments when giving up seems easier than pressing on. A true leader learns that victory is not found in applause, but in endurance. It is the courage to stand alone that often leads to the strength to stand for all. When truth becomes unpopular, when morality is mocked, when values are questioned, that is when real leadership must rise. Because leadership is not about echoing the crowd. It is about elevating it. It is not about predicting the future. It is about preparing the heart. It is not about being perfect. It is about being principled. The world does not remember leaders for their titles. It remembers them for their truth. It remembers those who stood for something when everything around them was shaking. It remembers those who had the courage to say, "This is right," even when it was dangerous to say so. America in 2025 does not need more leaders who follow the flow of culture. It needs leaders who will redirect its current, leaders who will put conviction before comfort, character before career, and courage before compromise. Because when truth is on trial, neutrality is not leadership. It is surrender. True leadership stands when others fall, speaks when others stay silent, and believes when others doubt. It does not tremble before pressure. It transforms under it. It does not seek safety. It seeks purpose. And in every generation, when the world begins to tremble, God raises up men and women who refuse to bow to fear, who choose faith over fame, and who remind the world that light still wins over darkness. That is the kind of leadership America needs now. Not the leadership of wealth or words, but the leadership of wisdom and worth. Not leadership that divides to conquer, but leadership that unites to heal. Not leadership that feeds on fear, but leadership that fuels hope. Because in the end, true leadership is not about how high you climb. It is about how many you lift. It is not about being first. It is about being faithful. And when the world trembles, the leader who stands for truth becomes the steady hand of hope for an entire generation. The crisis we face is not merely political. It is a crisis of the soul, and healing will begin only when leaders lead with humility, unity, and faith. Politics alone cannot fix what is broken in the human heart. Legislation cannot replace love. Policies cannot heal bitterness. Budgets cannot mend the moral fabric that has been torn by decades of pride, greed, and distrust. What we are witnessing in 2025 is not simply the failure of systems. It is the failure of the spirit. It is the reflection of a nation that has gained the world but is losing its soul. Our divisions run deeper than party lines. They are spiritual wounds, wounds of pride, wounds of fear, wounds of forgetting who we are. We are not merely a collection of states. We are a covenant of values. Freedom, justice, compassion, faith, these are not political slogans. They are spiritual truths that gave birth to this nation. But when a nation forgets its moral compass, even its greatest institutions begin to crumble. And that is the crisis before us, not the weakness of our government, but the weariness of our hearts. The healing of America will not begin in Congress or in the court. It will begin in the conscience. It will begin when leaders rediscover the sacred art of humility. Humility is not weakness. It is wisdom wrapped in grace. It is the understanding that leadership is not about being above others, but being among them. Humility listens before it speaks. It admits mistakes. It learns. It serves. It kneels before it commands. A humble leader does not seek to be right. He seeks to do right. And when humility returns to leadership, trust begins to rise again. For too long, leadership has worn the mask of pride. Pride that says, "I know everything." Pride that refuses correction. Pride that feeds division and calls it strength. But pride is the poison of leadership. It blinds vision, hardens hearts, and isolates those who were meant to inspire. America will not heal through prideful power. It will heal through humble purpose. Because humility does not divide, it unites. And unity, though How desperately this land needs it again. Unity does not mean uniformity. It does not mean that we all think the same or vote the same. Unity means that we remember we are one people under one flag, bound by one destiny. It means we can disagree without demeaning and differ without destroying. Unity is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of compassion in the midst of conflict. It is what transforms debate into dialogue and opposition into opportunity. The greatest leaders of history were not those who conquered nations. They were those who united them. Lincoln led through unity, binding up the wounds of a broken nation with mercy and resolve. Dr. King led through unity, reminding America that love is stronger than hate. Even our founding fathers, though diverse in vision and divided in opinion, found unity in one sacred truth: that freedom was worth standing together for. Today, we must rediscover that truth. For a house divided cannot stand, and a nation divided cannot lead. America must once again look past the lines that separate red from blue, rich from poor, powerful from powerless, and see instead the humanity that binds us all. We must remember that before we are Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals, we are Americans, children of a shared hope, heirs of a common dream. But unity alone is not enough. We need faith that lifts our eyes beyond what we can control to the one who holds all things together. Faith that reminds us that power is temporary, but purpose is eternal. Faith that humbles us to see that leadership without God becomes arrogance without direction. America's crisis is not just political. It is spiritual because we have tried to lead without leaning on the source of all wisdom. Faith gives vision when sight fails. It gives strength when hope fades. It gives endurance when everything else falls apart. Without faith, leadership becomes reactionary. With faith, leadership becomes revolutionary. Because faith teaches us to trust not in the size of our armies, but in the strength of our principles. It reminds us that truth is not decided by the majority, but defined by morality. When leaders lead with humility, they heal division. When they lead with unity, they build bridges. When they lead with faith, they restore the nation's soul. And when all three, humility, unity, and faith, come together, leadership becomes not just a position of influence, but a force of transformation. This is the leadership America longs for in 2025. Not leaders who promise to save the nation, but leaders who are willing to serve it. Not leaders who demand loyalty, but those who earn it through character. Not leaders who divide to conquer, but who unite to rebuild. The real battle before us is not between parties. It is between pride and purpose, chaos and conviction, fear and faith. And healing will only come when leaders choose the latter. Because no government can heal a wound that the heart refuses to forgive, and no policy can restore what the spirit refuses to renew. It will take humility to admit we have lost our way. It will take unity to rebuild what division destroyed. And it will take faith to believe that what was broken can still be made whole again. America's soul is not beyond redemption, but redemption will require leadership that bows before it leads, that listens before it speaks, and that prays before it acts. The crisis we face is not the end, it is the call. The call to return to the kind of leadership that remembers that greatness is not found in pride, but in purpose, not in control, but in character. When humility becomes our posture, unity our pursuit, and faith our foundation, then, and only then, will America's healing begin.